Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Definitely Talking podcast, where we shine a spotlight on our members of the deaf and hearing loss community. Today, our special guest is Mary Grace Whalen. Mary had a mild hearing loss in childhood, but she did not receive her first hearing aid until she was 32 years old. She has autosclerosis and a mixed hearing loss and is now bilaterally implanted with cochlear implants. Mary started a business doing presentations to schools, government agencies, and corporations and introduced them to assistive devices for people with hearing loss. Those in the deaf and hearing loss community may recognize her as the co-administrator of the Facebook group called Hearing Loss, the Emotional Side. This is where people from all over the world who identify as hard of hearing can join in friendship. Mary also writes for publications geared to people with hearing loss and is the author of The Legend of Eddie Well, which is a story about kindness in which she shares examples of people with hearing loss so that children can see themselves. She is now working on a second book called Living in the Color Magenta, Chronicles of a Deaf, Gray, and Italian Woman. Welcome, Mary.
Thank you.
Thank you for being with me today. All right, let's go ahead and jump into some history about your hearing loss. So, you did not receive hearing aids until you were in your early 30s. Can you tell me more about your early years with the hearing loss and why it took 30 years to be able to get the hearing technology that you needed?
Okay, so I was first diagnosed with hearing loss probably in kindergarten when the school physician checked my hearing, and she sent a note home to my mother that I had hearing loss. My mother also had hearing loss, but her hearing loss was not as severe as mine. Hers was always mild and then moderate. It didn't really accelerate until she was in later life. So otosclerosis is usually something that shows up uh, after the birth of children. For women, it's more prevalent in women. It usually shows up around the age that I got my first hearing aid. I could tell in school that I was having difficulty hearing. That's part of my mixed loss before the otosclerosis became evident. I had trouble hearing the teacher when he or she faced the blackboard. Sometimes if there were directions, I would turn to my left and see what someone wrote down, what page our homework was on, whatever. So there were things that I knew I was missing. And before I ever went to college, I was a secretary. So in high school, in shorthand and transcription, I had a teacher with a very strong British accent who would walk around on hardwood floors dictating, and I would follow him around the room with my eyes and try to be taking the dictation. So I knew something was really brewing then. So my mother's thought was, well, I was doing well in school. It didn't seem to impact me. In those days, there were no accommodations, no real accommodations. The only thing I recall in my younger years is the teacher sitting me in the front of the class.
Mm.
By, say, mid elementary school, they stopped doing that. It was almost like, well, she seems like she's doing fine. So it was really something that wasn't really discussed in those days. And it was in some ways secret. And for my mother, I think it was a very painful thing for her to see that I inherited her hearing loss. So she wanted me to be as quote unquote normal as possible.
Mm. That sounds very familiar. We've had other guests on this podcast who have shared similar stories to where their hearing loss was detected in their first year or two of elementary school. And then they go through all their primary and secondary learning years with a hearing loss that is not accommodated. Did you find that going through that experience of basically having to accommodate yourself by watching the teachers pacing back and forth in the room and making sure that you're always visually attentive. Did you find that there are some values that you learned from all the hard work you had to do to be able to understand spoken language before you got your hearing aids?
So I guess some might argue I didn't really need hearing aids when I was in elementary school, or maybe I needed something, but hearing aids were not as advanced as they are today, where they are really precisionally set. So I think I don't know. I don't, I never thought of myself as someone with hearing loss as a child, and that may sound surprising. That was the mindset that I developed, that, okay, I'm not hearing everything. But when I think back, I was in band, and there are some high notes that I don't think I really heard as intricately until I got my cochlear implants. Um, I can recall going to, when the whole school goes into the assembly room, and they have those documentaries that they try to teach you different things. I remember hearing a lot of treble and bass and thinking to myself, I hope I'm not tested on this because I don't really know what's going on. So there were things like that. I can recall one of my report cards, which I still have, saying that I didn't always follow directions. And
Mm.
I strongly suspect that may be um, part of it. Also, that I daydreamed, which I probably did. But I did well in school. So I guess I kind of camouflaged it um, without having instructors or educators who really uh, understood, like people do today, about special needs in the classroom.
Yes, and this was probably, I have a special education teaching background, by the way. So I'm familiar with the law in the United States, the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, IDEA. And that really did not come about until the 1970s. I know that when I was going through school in the 1980s, that there really was not a lot of accommodation for people with a mild hearing loss. They were expected to accommodate themselves. And so I'm I think it's very admirable that you did as well as you did in school without any assistance, and especially when you're watching videos and you can't always understand every word in the video at school, how that must have impacted you socially and, maybe from a mental health standpoint too, which brings us to some of your more recent advocacy work. Now, tell me how you got started with the Facebook group of Hearing Loss, the Emotional Side, because it sounds to me like you have a lot of experience with processing emotions involved with hearing loss.
Okay, my master's degree is in communications and writing for the media. But while I was in graduate school, I did take some courses um, that were about grief and bereavement. And it just seemed so similar to hearing loss. And at the end of my education, I did a term paper about grieving hearing loss. So this became something that I became very much aware of. I was on Facebook one day, and someone was talking about the sadness and all the grief that comes with hearing loss. And I commented on it and talked about learning about grief in graduate school. And Richard Parker, who has also written books, contacted me, and he said, this is something that really has to be addressed. You and I know someone else named Robin Chisholm Seymour, and I think it would be great if we could just start a group and people could talk about this part of hearing loss that really isn't addressed. And we spent many days uh, on Zoom talking about what that would entail, how we would reach people, what we could talk about. Richard is a writer, of course.
Mhm.
Robin has been a therapist in her previous life. She's retired now. And I, as a writer, also have written for Hospice Foundation of America, and I have written about hearing loss. So all of us had some type of background, but I think the greatest thread between us was that we all knew we grieved our hearing loss. And we wanted to help people through that stage because no one was talking about it. They would talk about the right hearing aid or the right cochlear implant, but no one was really talking about this tremendous loss. And I had remembered studying in graduate school disenfranchised grief. And it felt so much like disenfranchised grief. And there are so many different types of grief that I see on our site. I'm not a therapist, but I can see that sometimes it gets complicated and it falls into some of those categories um, where someone gets stuck in a certain place, or maybe they find resolution. But we can also, when we grieve, revisit those different stages at different times, because like any grief, as we all know, for anyone who's ever lost anyone, grief doesn't follow a straight line. You
Mhm.
go back, you go forward, and it's not that you go backward, but you do revisit because it's such a tremendous loss.
Stress. And we talk about, you hear about the stages of grief, you know, denial, bargaining, then there's some type of sadness or depression, there's some type of anger, and eventual acceptance. Have I left anything out with the stages of grief from your background and knowledge?
Okay, so I'm not a grief expert. I've written about grief, but what I learned, most of what I learned was from a very well-respected professor named Dr. Kenneth Doka, who has gone all over the world to crisis situations and spoken about grief. And Kubler-Ross felt that that was uh, a format for people to follow. These are the stages. You can revisit each one. Dr. Doka, while he respects, of course, those stages, he said that some uh, people who deal with death and dying don't feel that there's a set pattern for everyone, that you may or may not go through certain stages, or you may uh, have your own personal experience. So I guess really in the end, it is whatever it is to you. And how do we define our emotions? Some are more aware of them than others. And does it become something because we call it a name, because we name it? Or is it really just so personal and complex? Does that make sense?
Yes. So there's really not a set formula that, as we've been accustomed to learning about. I know in college, the Kubler-Ross model of grief was something that I was familiar with. My undergraduate degree is in communication. So we would talk about things such as processing our emotions and communicating them as well. Do you find that through your writing, and we can talk about your books too, or does your writing help you process some of the emotions involved with your hearing loss? And can you explain more about that?
Well, my hearing loss really accelerated, like I said, when I was 32 years old. And it was a long-term grief that I wasn't even aware that I was going through at the time. I had two young children. Um, I had uh, a job and responsibilities. I it we didn't even have the ADA yet. So it was sort of something pushed under the rug. My mother never talked about her hearing loss. She kind of, I guess it would be fair to say she kind of tried to deny it. When my father would try to convince her to get a hearing aid, she'd say, "Oh, I'm doing fine," but he knew better. Um,
Mhm.
well, I think I grieved my hearing loss, and in being an advocate, I didn't deal with my own grief for it. Plus, in my late 30s, my husband had a heart attack, something that was in his family. And I dealt with the illness, and there became a time when it could be very complex because I had to put my hearing loss, or I tried to put it aside because you could just deal with so much at one time,
Mhm.
little kids and whatever. So I think I never realized till later on that all the advocacy work that I was doing, I was maybe not looking inside what was going on in my own mind. And I do accept my hearing loss. I think hearing loss can do so much to change you, but in some strange ways, it helped me grow too, because
Mhm.
we realize that there are certain things that happen in life, and there are different things for everyone, that uh, it's just part of life. We have to accept it. Life is not perfect.
That is right. And also, we do not have to project an image that things are perfect in our lives when they are not. I think we have started to normalize the, it's cliched, but it's true that it's okay not to be okay. Sometimes we do not have to have all the answers or know exactly what works for us in every hearing situation or with our grief processing. We don't all have the answers. And I know, I'm a mom as well, and my hearing loss was diagnosed after my oldest son was born. So I had a newborn and I was in my late 20s. I can totally relate to you raising young children and watching them grow. And that's all our children has ever known is a mom with hearing loss. What type of impact has your hearing loss had on your loved ones, such as your children and the rest of your family?
Okay. So I think it taught my children to be compassionate. I'm very proud of them. They, I don't think it's easy for children to have to try to communicate with you, and you're struggling, and they have little voices and you're trying to hear them, and it can get very complex. My children, I think they grew because of it. They uh, respect all human beings. And the same for my husband. My husband was, and my children, they were my greatest advocates. And I hear and I see people who talk about their families who were unkind to them. And I can not say that my family was always very protective of me if they felt someone did not treat me right because of my hearing loss, or that they weren't doing the right thing. I'll give an example. For Mother's Day one year, my husband took me out to buy an SLR camera because I was getting into photography at that stage of my life. And so the sales clerk kept turning around and showing different things. But I guess he saw I was struggling to hear. So he started talking to my husband. And my husband reminded him that I was the customer, and
Mm.
he would appreciate it if he would speak directly to me. Um, my children are the same way. If we go out to dinner, they'll ask me, is a certain area good for us to sit? And which chair would I like to sit in? Um, They make sure that I'm included, and they've done that since they were very young. And while I've always felt sad that they had to struggle, I'm proud of them that um, it caused them so much growth.
Yes. Hearing loss is a shared experience, not just with the person who lives with hearing loss, but the people who love and are involved in their lives. So I applaud your family providing that type of support and understanding, but also for your children, the foundations that having to be more patient and understanding and kind and compassionate, that foundation they built by you being their mom and you being yourself and modeling that kindness to them, they reciprocated that by being an advocate alongside you. And that is such a wonderful story. Thank you for sharing that. Now, we're at the end of our interview, and this is what I call a big three question. I have three children, a boy, girl, boy. So my special number is three. And the question that I have for you in three words, how would you describe hearing loss? And could you explain?
First thing I would say is that initially it's painful. You're 32 years old, and the moment of truth, you're in this audiologist's office, and they're telling you that you're going to be deaf by the time you're 50. And unfortunately, the ENT doctor I had at that time told me I would be unemployable. And that
Mm,
really shocked me that he didn't want to encourage me to just keep going. So for me, it was uh, a point where I felt that, of course, I wanted to work, be
mhm,
productive, to be engaged. And I used to ask my husband all the time, do you ever think I'll be deaf? Uh, Maybe someday I won't hear it all. How will I communicate with all of you? As you know, it can be very upsetting. And he always said to me, I don't think you'll ever be that bad. Well, he actually did not live to see me go totally deaf and get cochlear implants, but that good part is that there are cochlear implants and things have improved over the decades. It's very emotional because, as you know, hearing loss is so complex. You miss
mhm,
things, there's misunderstandings, there's uh, feelings that people see you differently.
mhm,
Do we see ourselves differently? I think I tried so hard by being an advocate to convince myself that I could still live a quality life, that I was a valid human being with a right to a life to dignity. And I really fought for that for myself and for others. And I don't think I'll ever stop. The enlightening part is that I think we realize that nobody's life is perfect. Each of us has something in our lives that is a setback, and not just one thing, usually more than one thing. And I feel like my hearing loss really brought me to a better place in my life. Growing up, anyone who knew me knew that I was very shy, introverted, always the type that liked to sit and do art or read or whatever. As time passed, I feel like I just don't think anyone can stop me from doing whatever I feel is important to me. And I did more as a person who is deaf than a person who was hearing. I worked my way through college in my 40s. I received my master's degree at 54.
mhm,
Then I was asked to teach as an adjunct professor at two different colleges. I've written a book, and I think I'm a better person because I realize that all of us have so-called flaws and or imperfections, and that still we're going to do whatever we want to do.
Mm, that's powerful. Very powerful. Now, you mentioned your books. Where can people learn more about your writing and your books?
Okay, so first stop would be my website, and that's my full name, Mary Grace Whalen Storyteller.com. And that speaks a little bit about my history, my hearing loss, the Facebook group that I co-administer. My book, The Legend of Eddie the Whale, is on Amazon. And if you just put the name in or my name, you should see it come up.
Mhm.
And I'm finishing my second book, Living in the Color Magenta, Chronicles of a Deaf, Gray, and Italian Woman. And in that book, I deal with identity, these different parts of us that all come together. The daughter of an Italian immigrant father, all the culture that brought, uh, being a person who transitioned between two cultures, hearing and deaf, and growing older and just learning uh, that there's joy at every stage. So I hope, it's really a collection of stories that you can go around the book and either read, different chapters, or I would prefer everyone read it from cover to cover, of course. But I think it brings together all the many parts that we are. I don't identify uh, by my hearing loss or
Mm.
by one factor. It all came together. Well, years ago, I worked in IBM, and they went around the room and asked everybody, tell us who you are. And that was before I ever went to college. And most people said, oh, I graduated from XYZ college, and then I went on to a corporate job and did this or that or whatever. And then years later, I thought about that, and I said to myself, oh, at this stage of my life, being deaf is definitely part of who I am.
Mhm.
I'm getting older. Um, and the Italian part of my culture, and of course, being an American too, I'm born here. It all comes together and somehow um, it meshes together. For instance, I could understand the language difficulties my father had, this being his second language, and that can be similar to being deaf because there's a struggle with communications, growing older, being a woman, like there's more opportunity today.
Mm.
So I just kind of went into this thing where I thought about how we are more than just the sum of our parts.
Oh, that's wonderful. Well, thank you, Mary, for being such an engaging guest today and for sharing more about your life and about your writing. I'm excited about your second book when it comes out. I'll have to check it out. But thank
Thanks so
you.
much.
And for all of you tuning in to today's podcast, thank you so much for your support. And we hope that you have a great rest of your day and week. So take care.